right, the clock seems to indicate it's time to bring the February 18th meeting of the Board of Harbor Commissioners to order. Mary, would you call roll?
Frank Kelly.
Here.
Will Anakushin. Here. Betsy Kramer. Eric Friedman. Jim Sloan. Here. Bill Spicer. Absent.
All right. Let's see. What am I doing? Mr. Bridley, are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, there are really no changes tonight. However, I'd like to take the opportunity at this point to introduce and welcome a couple of individuals that will serve as our, I'm sorry, it's on, Will. If they haven't turned it on downstairs, I'm sorry about it. Should we start again? Okay. All I can do is turn on the green light. If it doesn't come on, there's nothing I can do about that. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce two gentlemen that are here this evening. They are the new liaisons that have been appointed by the City Council. First, one of our new City Council members-elect, Frank Hotchkiss, is here this evening, and he has been appointed. And the second gentleman is Mike Jordan, and he is a planning commissioner that will serve as our liaison also. And I think the two of them would like to address the commission.
Gentlemen.
Hi. I wanted to say, once I got elected, one of the early things that came to me was that maybe we could try to encourage economic growth with additional cruise ships or military vessels or something. You know, things were looking bleak downtown. And I went to John, and I think he probably saw me come and thought, oh, my God, one of these crazy new council people, they're going to try to take control of everything. That's not the case. They do a great job. I just want to let you know that I think the harbor is just one of the most, it's unique. When our competition is Laguna, Monterey, places like that, but we offer so much more. In lots of ways, it starts with the harbor. So I think you guys men and women, are really important. And if anything I can do to help, I would be happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the top, Frank, we'll say a boat for every person in the city. Does that do it? No. Hello, Frank Kelly. It's a long time since I've seen you. I just wanted to put a face to the name. So you guys are a real commission, too, so I know you can wander up and talk to Planning Commission anytime you want to. But you probably won't see much of me here. I leverage Channel 18 really well at home. But I wanted to encourage you that I know you probably all realize that at the end of Planning Commission, we have a session there where we report back on our liaison duties and items of interest. And certainly if you feel that something is of interest to your group or any of you individually, and you specifically wanted me to mention that, you're certainly welcome to chase me down via staff and make sure that I do bring it up at the next meeting. Okay? So thanks, and welcome to the new commissioners, too, up there.
Thank you. All right. Then let's see, this is where we would take public comment from anything that is not on our normally scheduled agenda. So if there is no public comment, then we will go on to the approval of the minutes from January 21st. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll motion.
I'll second. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Minutes are approved. We're off to the director's report.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, just a couple of brief items this evening. As I usually do, I touch on a couple of things that have gone beyond onto City Council for their approval. We have had the resolution approving our authority to apply for 2 grants from the Department of Boating and Waterways, one in the amount of $350,000, the other one $490,000, in hopes that we can secure those funds to make some improvements to our public launch ramp area. And Carl has been working diligently to secure those funds, and if we do, we'll move forward with those improvements. The next item which I wanted to touch upon, I distributed to you along with Mayor and Council a memorandum which somewhat summarized where we are with our federal funding for our annual dredge contract and our maintenance dredging of the navigational channel. As you know, we secure these funds in a combination of working with the Corps of Engineers and then working with our congressional representatives. This is what they call the appropriation time at Congress and senators making us or giving us the opportunity to submit those requests on behalf of the city. And we submitted 2 requests, one for our annual dredging and the second for the Lower Mission Creek flood improvement project. So those applications or appropriation requests have been submitted. And as part of that, we learned some unsettling news, which is kind of both good news and bad news. Good news is the president's budget, which was recently published, indicated that or allocated a recommendation of $2,040,000 for our annual dredging contract. And normally I would be very excited and pleased to report that, because that's right along the lines of about what we need to do the annual dredging. Unfortunately, what we learned from the Corps of Engineers is that they expect the contract for next year's dredging, beginning next fall, could be as much as $3.7 million. And quite frankly, that was a shock to both myself and Carl, who works closely with the Corps folks and the dredge contractor, because that's almost doubling what we've normally spent. There's an explanation. I'm not sure it has a lot of rationale to it, but due to the stimulus funding that has been allocated throughout the country, and in particular to California, a lot of dredge contractors received additional contracts or funding for some major projects throughout California. So for the most part, their capacity or their ability with their current equipment is pretty much maximized. And the bids that have been being received for projects beyond that stimulus funding have escalated. And because we're at the end of a 3-year contract, and we'll start a new one next fall, we'll be rebidding this work this summer, and the anticipation is it could be as much as $3.7 million. There's no assurances that, there's no guarantees to that. I'm almost nervous they threw the number out there, because then the dredge contractors might think, well, that's what they expect to spend. But it's a competitive process, so hopefully the unit prices will dictate. But it's a tall order for us to find in a tight budget economy of any sort, federal, state, or level, or federal, state, or local level, an additional $1.7 million. So I think we have an uphill battle. I do plan on attending and meeting with our congressional representatives in March. That will mean a trip back to Washington, D.C., working with our lobbyist firm, which we've done many years in the past, trying to explain to them why we need more than the $2 million that's in the president's budget. So that will be a kind of wait-and-see situation, and we won't know much about the outcome of that until later this summer as they begin their caucus and committee work on the appropriation funding levels. So I agreed, based on some conversations I've had with commissioners, to place it on this agenda. If you have any questions about that process, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr.
I'll just go over the tentative agenda items, and then if you've got questions, I'll answer them. Tentative agendas for March, and I want to add a couple. We hope to have our lease with the Sailing Center agreement. We're working on a new lease with the Yacht Club. We're also going to take another look at our annual fiscal year 2011 budget, and hopefully, if the Commission's comfortable, look at recommendations next month. The mooring, Mick reminded me, the mooring process and the lottery for the mooring permits east of the wharf will be held next month, and the Clean Marina report, our annual Clean Marina report, also will find its way onto the agenda for next month. So With that, I would conclude my report and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Bridley. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, I have a question. I think I assume it's premature to ask where you would get the 1.6 million if you do not get the additional amount. But since it's premature, I won't ask it. But what I would like to say, I would like to have a motion of us on the Harbor Commission to supporting your trip to Washington and your request for the additional money. So that's my comment.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
All right. Any discussion? So at this moment, I'll throw in the discussion on that, which is there are only three sources of income down in the harbor. One is our parking fees, which we just raised. The second are our long-term lease agreements, which are contracts that we really can't change in midstream, and so that leaves us down in our harbor. And then you have slip transfer fees and visitors fees and slip fees, basically being really our only elastic supply. And if it were to come to pass that we had to make up about a 1.6 million shortfall, quick math would be a $1,500 surcharge per slip to make up the dredging shortfall. That doesn't sound like a real fun proposal, and I think the City Council would find a few people at their next meeting should that come to pass. But anyway, that would be a quick solution, but we'd obviously have to go into our reserves and try and smooth it over. And I will get down there in just a second. And I hope that since Congress, in their wisdom, created a situation that caused this, that Congress, in its wisdom, with a little explanation from John and our lobbyists, would help get us right back out of this situation. And those are my comments before we go to a vote. Commissioner Sloan.
So they gave a $3.7 million for next year. Did they give any idea about future years when maybe the supply and demand curve shifts a little bit and the stimulus money dries up, or are we looking at this for the future?
Well, Commissioner Sloan, it's a 3-year contract, so the unit prices typically hold throughout that period of time. So it will have an impact beyond the first year. Again, a lot of it depends upon the sand level that we're talking about having to remove, too. I mean, if there's not as much sand, then the cost won't be that much. As much as Commissioner Kramer indicated it might be premature, I think maybe it would be appropriate for me to attempt to answer some of where the sources of funding might come. Clearly, it'll be our first order of business to try and get the federal government to step up to the plate and provide the additional funding as part of the Corps of Engineers budgetary process. The second one is one that we have both benefited from in the past and also participated and contributed to in the past, where I've had requests come to my office from the Corps of Engineers to provide unspent money in Santa Barbara because we didn't have as much sand to spend in Morro Bay, to spend in Ventura, to spend in Oceanside, to spend somewhere else. So my hopes are that if we are unsuccessful in getting the funds, or the total amount of the funds, that we can play the chips that we've thrown on the table before and say, well, maybe they have some excess money, or maybe another port or harbor has excess money, and we will need that to get us through that, at least that first year, which is the most critical year, because if the funding level needs are greater than the appropriations, and we've got to fill the gap somehow. And I agree with Commissioner Kelly's assessment. It would be unrealistic to try and find a way to go to the slip holders or the parking fees or whatever and try and balance it. We wouldn't do that. We would go to reserves in an attempt to fill the gap for that year in hopes that by the next appropriation process we get a more level playing field and get the funding back where it needs to be. So there's many different variables that can be used to kind of fill in if need be. And again, remember, it's an estimate by the Corps. It's not an assurance that's what the bid would be, but I think they want to be safe in making sure that we make the right request and get the additional funding. So hopefully that helps.
That does. Does that help you, Commissioner? So there was some nice discussion. So all those in favor of Commissioner Kramer's motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that passed. If there are no further comments on that one, we're off to the business services report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Per the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, it requires that anyone providing business services within the harbor, within the marinas, obtain a permit from the Waterfront Department. And these permits are commonly known as business activity permits, or the acronym BAP is how they're most commonly referred to. The permittee is required to carry a minimum amount of liability insurance and also must have a valid city business license. Currently, we have 59 service providers operating under this program in the harbor. The service permits are $25 a year, so it's a real economical program. It's just to have some orderliness and some liability coverage in the harbor where they're working. In your packet, there's a list of current permittees authorized to conduct business, and you can see that there's everything from hull cleaning businesses to engine repair to folks who paint the names on the boats. The BAP policy also authorizes the department to issue a maximum of 12 charter permits under this program. And the charter permits are $250 a year, and they allow a Coast Guard licensed captain with a designated slip in the harbor to carry passengers for hire, a maximum of 6. They're commonly referred to as 6-pack charters. All 12 of those permits are currently in effect. They're in high demand. We have about 22 people on the waiting list, and the waiting list is running about a 3-year wait right now. We issued 2 permits in 2009, the most recently being in December of 2009, and those 2 individuals had been on the wait list for 3 years. Let's see. The charter operators are also required to submit their logs, their activity logs, and their IRS Form Cs to document their sales each year. And the purpose of that requirement is to track the level of charter activity that's going on and identify any possible detrimental effects to the percentage rent-paying landing operators, such as Sea Landing and Santa Barbara Sailing Center. The BAP charter operators' annual income in 2008 varied from $2,400 for the whole year on the low end to $68,000 on the high end. But the average income of the BAP charter operators over the last 5 years was approximately $24,600 per year. The 12 charter operators account for about 4 to 7% of the total charter activity, the total value of the charter activity that takes place out of the harbor each year. And staff does not believe that that level of activity is a cause for concern with the charter tenants, again, Sea Landing and Santa Barbara Sailing Center, that pay percentage rent. Moving on to the city's automatic payment system for slip permittees. The system's been available to slip permittees since January of 2002, and it's a great option for people that travel a lot or are concerned with their payment or their statement getting lost in the mail. We're up to about 390 slip permittees at this time. About 36% of our 1,133 slip permittees have chosen to join this program. We're pretty happy with that number. Program participants receive their usual monthly statement on or about the 1st of the month, and the difference is that on the 15th of the month, their slip fee that appeared on that statement is automatically drafted out of their bank account. Application forms for the payment service will be sent out in the April billing to give everybody a reminder that the system is available, and they're always available at the Harbor Patrol office as well. We encourage slip permittees to use the service, and occasionally find out that folks aren't even aware that it's available. So it's nice to make them aware of that. We attempt to do so when we see slip transfers come through, and when payments are missed or late payments are made, we remind them that that is an option too. And that concludes the business services report, and I'd be happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any comments or questions? All right, Commissioner Sloan.
Just on the charter revenue, so how about the larger vessels, the Channel Cat and some of the others? Do they fall under the BAP program, or are they under a different program?
Commissioner Sloan, the Channel Cat does not actually fall under the business activity permit program. The charter permit program is limited to 6-pack charters, 6 passengers only. The Channel Cat charters under a lease agreement with the Santa Barbara Sailing Center. So when they pick up passengers, they go over to the sailing center and do the charter based out of there. We wouldn't want 100 folks trooping out to the end of Marina 4 and to get on the Channel Cat.
Yeah, I see some of their catering services and things like that doing it, but that's fine. And then just the other thing on the automatic payment services, you know what's been helpful for me down in the harbor is to see something posted at the gates, and so when you send out the reminders, you might just post something there, because I think that'd help remind people as well to look in their April statement or something like that. So that's it.
Commissioner Kramer.
I think it's unfortunate there's such a large waiting list, and I was wondering if any consideration was being given to expanding the number of permit holders.
Periodically, we convene the BAP charter or the BAP and chartering committee. It's one of the committees we'll probably be talking about later on tonight. And every year to 2 years, this comes up, and we gather a public meeting of usually well attended by these charter operators and discuss items just such as that, ways to make the wait list speed up or possibly expand the number. But 12 has been the magic number since the inception of the program. Again, Sea Landing, the landings and the percentage rent paying tenants, very concerned about having too much of this kind of activity, maybe nibbling away at their profit margin.
I can understand that, but I just thought I'd ask.
Commissioner Friedman.
Aside from the $250 permit, is there any other revenue that we get from the BAPs?
Commissioner Friedman, there is not. They don't have a percentage rent structure at all. It's $25 a year for the service permits, and up until last July, it was $100 a year for the charter permits. Last July, we raised it to $250 a year in hopes of addressing Commissioner Kramer's issue, figuring that a charter permit at $250 a year, you might not be encouraged to do much chartering. If it's $1,000 or $2,000 a year, you're going to have to be pretty serious about it. So that's one of the ways we looked at speeding up the process.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Sloan.
On that, is there any enforcement mechanism to make sure that their captain's licenses stay current or that the vessel has been inspected? Is that our responsibility or the Coast Guard's, or whose responsibility is that?
Commissioner Sloan, the 6-passenger charter operators fall under the inspection, the Coast Guard inspection requirements. So the Coast Guard does not inspect the 6-pack vessels. We maintain a database at the Waterfront Department of the expiration date of the captain's license, so we know it pops up on our tickler when the license is going to expire. And again, they're required to carry $1 million liability insurance and a city business license, and we monitor all of that as well.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Scott, I have one. Since we have the automatic payment service for slip fees in that format, have we looked into making it an automatic debit on an individual's credit card? Is that an option that we've considered?
We have asked that question of the finance department, and apparently there's an issue there that we have not been able to resolve. They can do it this way with the automatic draft out of the checking account, but for some reason we have not been able to set up an automatic draft out of the credit card.
Because it would seem to me that we could probably get a larger percentage than 36%, because most people carry a credit card, and the potential for an overdraft is virtually gone because it is a credit instrument. And so I would encourage you to go back to the finance office and ask them if they would look at whatever the hang-up is. I'm not sure what it is.
It's a good suggestion. I'll look into it again and get you a little better answer on that, Frank.
Okay. Thank you so much. If there are no further questions, thank you, Scott, and we're off to the facilities management report.
Chairman Kelly and Commissioners, the harbor is going to be a very busy place this spring, beginning with a couple of dredging projects. The first is the spring cycle dredging of the Federal Channel done by the Corps, which will begin tomorrow. AIS Construction Company will be concluding their 3-year contract with the Corps with the completion of this cycle. Recent storms have deposited quite a bit of material, so there'll be quite a bit of work to do, and we expect them to finish the job by about the middle of April. They're going to start with the smaller dredge, the Corinne, that did the fall cycle dredging, while their larger dredge, the Lancina, has been occupied with some stimulus-funded dredging up in Morro Bay. That should be complete in about the middle of March, so we expect Encina to come back down here and finish up the Santa Barbara Harbor dredging. By about the middle of April, they'll finish the dredging, and they'll be expected to completely demobilize. That's all the pipe off the beach, dredge yard, everything goes away. The Corps of Engineers is currently preparing an environmental assessment and plans and specifications for the next 3-year contract. The environmental assessment should be done in about May, and the bid package should be ready to go out to bid in about June with award in September. That's pretty typical, a couple of months before the next cycle begins. As John mentioned, they expect dredging costs to go up a little bit. There's not very many companies that can do this kind of dredging, but those that can are interested, and we're going to rely on the Corps to go ahead and put together a good bid package and solicit as many potential bidders as possible. The other big project is the West Beach Sand Management Project that's also going to start tomorrow. AIS Construction Company was recently awarded a contract by the County Parks Department to remove about 50,000 cubic yards of sand from West Beach. The Parks Department secured some funds from FEMA for some erosion up in Goleta Beach in 2005, and they're going to spend out those funds in this fiscal year. They've had a lot of additional erosion. About 18,000 cubic yards of sand will be removed from the intertidal area on West Beach with conventional earth-moving equipment and trucked up to Goleta Beach, and that begins on Monday. The trucking does. They'll start some of the excavation tomorrow. And then the remainder of the material, about 40,000 yards, will be removed with a large excavator, barge-mounted excavator called the Bonnet Carver that came into the harbor the other day. It's going to load up a large scow that holds about 1,500 cubic yards of sand, and it'll be pulled up to Goleta Beach with a large tug and deposited on the beach up in Goleta Beach over the next 3 weeks. The project has to be completed by March 16th. There's going to be a few impacts to the harbor in and of itself. West Beach will be open, but of course the public will be kind of precluded from going in and around the excavation area. And navigation will be open except for when the scow comes in and out of the harbor. It's very big. It's 180 feet long by 70 feet wide. So while it's maneuvering and being put in position, we'll probably have vessel traffic limited during those times. It's a good project for us. The West Beach dredging is consistent with our sediment management plan. It opens up an area in that portion of the harbor that's protected by the harbor but not within the harbor. So a lot of small craft like to use it. Some of the college and youth sailing programs are there and kayaking. So it really advances some of the projects that we've been trying to do over the years. And we look forward to working with them, but it's going to be a busy place. Continuing along the lines of a very busy harbor is the Marina One replacement project. The shoreside construction is complete. That's the installation of a new electrical system for Marina One. There's going to be one more short power outage next Tuesday on the 23rd, and that's going to be to energize this new electrical system. Once that's complete, the work is going to move out over the water. The docks are being fabricated up in a plant in Dixon. They've already done about 10 or 15 of 75 floats. They're going to be constructed over about the next month and then sub-assembled there. There's 75 concrete floats, and they assemble them to 25 3-unit sub-assemblies, and they'll start coming down at the beginning of April. The next large activity that's going to happen, or involved activity, is installation of a submarine cable under Fish Float South, and that's the commercial fishing dock just in front of West Marine. That's going to be done the week of March 1st through 4th, and it's a pretty big project, and it's going to be a bit disruptive for the folks going to and from their vessels in Marina One, but the marina will be open again. After that, we'll start installing some temporary utilities, so when the new docks come in at the beginning of April, there'll be temporary outages of water and power, but there will be power and water for all the vessels. We expect to keep Marina One open the whole time. We have tentatively scheduled a harbor community meeting on March 23rd at 5:30 p.m. in the Marine Center classroom to go over some of the construction details. We'll also talk about some of the displaced vessels. There's going to be 30 to 50, maybe even 70 vessels displaced at any one time during this project, beginning the first week in April. We'll contact the displaced vessel owners directly and give them slip assignments and work that out. But it's pretty involved. And the project in and of itself is somewhat complicated, and anybody that goes anywhere near Marina One is going to be impacted by this. So we encourage anyone to attend the meeting, and we can answer any questions they may have and inform them about the project and let them know we'll do everything we can to keep the harbor fully functional during the construction. And that concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Are there any questions for Commissioner Anakuchin?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Carl, can you explain how a scow is going to dump this sand on the beach or in the surf zone? Is it a hopper dredge or what?
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Anakuchin, the scow is not a hopper dredge. This large excavator is going to excavate the sand from the subtidal area and place it into the scow. It'll be pulled up there, and then they'll add water to it to create a slurry, and it'll be pumped onto the beach into pits where they'll decant the water off and create a beach with a pump that's commonly referred to as a Toyo pump or an eddy pump. We used a small version of these pumps in 2005, I think, to dredge the inside of the breakwater, and it's a high sediment content pump that can really pump 60-70% solids. And so that's how they expect to offload the scow up at Goleta Beach.
Has this been tried before? Is it proof of concept, verified, and so on? Or are we going to do some, what do they call it, a learning moment over there on Goleta Beach?
I'm sure the learning curve is going to be a little bit steep. It has been done before. This pump is, these eddy pumps are very efficient. We've tried them. This company, AIS, has one that they've used many times. I'm sure the first few loads are going to be a little bit difficult, and they're going to have to work out some of the bugs. But they're pretty confident that they'll be able to move a lot of material and get it pumped on the beach pretty quickly.
I'm not worried about the pumping and plumbing so much as what's going to happen to that scow sitting in the surf zone, subject to whatever vicissitudes the weather might impose on it.
The scow is moored probably 300 or 400 feet offshore, and there's a pipeline that goes onto the beach, partially floating, partially submerged, and then it wraps back up into this little discharge pit where they decant the water off. They did pretty much the exact same thing with the Westport, the hopper dredge, when they conducted a similar operation in 2003. It's just a slightly different means of pumping the material onto the beach. And then weather dependent, if the weather's rough, of course, they won't be able to operate.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl.
Any further questions? Okay, Commissioner Sloan.
Carl, on the Marine One replacement project, when they do these sub-assembled docks, where are they going to store them down here?
Commissioner Sloan, all the sub-assembled docks will be put together in their plant in Dixon, and they'll all be done the first week in April. So they'll start shipping them April 4th, and weather pending, they'll be able to take them all down during that week. So as soon as they get down here, they'll be launched immediately, probably from the launch ramp with a large crane, and then floated into position, similar to what I showed you, I think, last month. So that's the plan as of today, and we hope they can pull it off, because it's going to be quite a complicated project. But there won't be any large areas where I don't think we'll be storing any large amounts of equipment. They plan on putting it into position almost immediately and really get the ball rolling, because there's quite a bit to do.
Will they launch them through the launch ramp, or how are they going to get them from off the trucks or whatever into the water? And I guess, how big are these things?
They're each approximately 48 feet long, almost 50 feet long. They're 3 16-foot concrete floats. And they have some spreader bars and slings. They're probably going to use a crane at the launch ramp and put together some dunnage like we recently did, putting in the spuds for that large excavator. They may use the boatyard. We've launched docks with the boatyard in the past, but it's sort of up to the contractor to see what's the most efficient way. It'll be interesting. I'll let the commission know, of course, when they get started. It'll be kind of a fun project to watch. I encourage you to come down.
Great, thank you.
And what are they going to use? Well, I have a question on that, because Commissioner Sloan ticked my fancy on this. What will they use to maneuver them over into position?
Commissioner Kelly, they'll use, for the most part, some of the dredge tender type material. They're small and they're powerful. They're like small tugs, and they're pretty light and easy. We do dredge dock projects all the time and maneuver them around with our harbor patrol vessels, so they're not too hard to maneuver.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions for Carl? Off to the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This time last month when we met, I think you remember we had just come out the back end of some pretty considerable southeasterly storms, and we reported to you on some of that activity in the beached boats. And I'm here tonight to report to you on how we dealt with those beach boats. Altogether, when the storms cleared, there were 9 boats on city beaches. And 4 of those, I'm happy to report, the owners took care of them, paid salvors to come and remove them from the beach and dispose of them in their entirety. The other 5, the city had to contract with a salvage company. In this case, Marburg was the low bidder, and got that work. We paid a little over $9,000 to have those 5 boats removed from the beach. They did a terrific job. We had the benefit of some extremely low seasonal tides for them to work with, and they raked the beach clean, and I'm happy to say they did a terrific job, and the beach is restored to its natural condition, if not better. So that is the situation there. We will be pursuing recompense from the registered owners of those vessels, starting with billing them, and if we don't get an immediate response from them, it'll go up to the Finance Department for collections. We also hold small claims court as an opportunity or an option for receiving those funds back from those responsible owners. The good news in all of this is also the fact that only one of those 9 boats came from our permitted mooring area, and it wasn't even really a function of the mooring tackle itself failing. It wasn't anchors or chain snapping or anything like that. It was predictably a pendant line, which is, of course, the line connecting the bow or the prow of the vessel to the mooring ball itself. This is usually, although built to spec, it shouldn't be a weak link, but unattended by the owners of the vessels, it can become readily the weak link, and through chafing and wear. In fact, it's in our ground tackle specification that the city requires and expects routine inspection by the owners of the vessels of those pendant lines. And so there was only one vessel from the mooring area, and it was from a broken pendant. So I guess you could call it a pull test on the mooring area equipment, and it seemed to pass that test. And we have just 4 slides here to provide for you that show you the condition of the vessels and their removal after the storms. This shows the large excavator that Marburg used. It's quite a sight to see. It's something out of Jurassic Park. It eats these boats pretty quickly. It can take care of a boat. The biggest boat we had on the beach was a 50-foot ferro cement vessel. That one took a few hours, but some of the smaller boats it could deal with in an hour and a half. Go ahead, Scott. And this shows them at work on the beach, on East Beach. Most of these boats went up around the volleyball courts down to the Cabrillo Arts Center on East Beach. And this final slide, by intention or not, actually has, if you will, an artistic quality to it. It actually shows through the jaws of the excavator what the East Beach winter anchorage looks like on a calm day. But it also has the warning that if you're not careful and you don't attend to your vessel, how it can end up relative to the excavation going on there. And I know I mentioned the moorings, and I'd like to follow up on that with a reminder that the lottery that we talked about last month to fill the vacant positions in the East Beach lottery area, the East Beach mooring area, is still open. That window will be open until March 3rd at 5 o'clock. Folks can pick up applications at the waterfront office. They can download and fax in applications off our website. All they have to do is go to the city's website, click on departments, get on the waterfront department. There's a link there to the mooring lottery applications, and they can be faxed to our fax number at 805-897-2588. And once that window closes, we'll be assembling those for a Harbor Commission chair to draw and rank at our meeting next month in March. And there are still plenty of spaces available for folks out there interested in applying for this lottery, so we would encourage them to turn in applications before the 3rd of March, or by 5 o'clock that day. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Kramer.
One question, were any of the boats salvageable so that they were able to be used and again?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, no, not really. What happened, especially with this storm, while I mentioned these series of storms, while I mentioned the advantage of the low tide that of course was mirrored on the opposite side of the day by some very high tides. So these boats would hit the beach and they'd lay there for several hours at medium or low tide, and then a high tide would come in and really sink them deeper into the sand. That's first. And second, because of the ongoing inclement conditions for several days, it really didn't provide any really salvage opportunities to get the boats back out to sea or get them up high and dry, undamaged, so they could be put on flatbeds and headed for repairs. So we were unable to, and the owners were unable to salvage any out of this event. Mr. Chair, finally, I apologize. I skipped an important item here because I wanted to go from discussing the moorings to more discussion of the moorings. But I wanted to note an important event that occurred with our Harbor Patrol at the beginning of February, and I'm only bringing it to your attention because it evidences the considerable and broad training our officers undergo, and it really struck me that you and people watching might want to hear about this. The officers on duty, Officers Kuhlman and Neufer, received a call in the evening that the skipper of the Allen T, one of the crew boats servicing the offshore rigs, had a seizure. And what the officers did was they went out to the boat is about 2 miles offshore in one of our patrol boats, and offloaded Officer Neufer and onto the boat, who made the medical contact, did the assessment, stabilized the patient, and then commandeered the 95-foot oil crew boat, triple screw, by the way, oil crew boat, into the harbor and placed it precisely at the pier, turned it on a dime and put it at the pier. And not only do I think they deserve some recognition for both the medical response, the personnel transfer, and the operation of the boat, once again, I think it really demonstrates the broad range of training our officers have and how they're willing to put that to use in any given circumstance. And that would officially end my report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kronman. Are there any questions? Commissioner Anakuchin.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kronman, what were the weather conditions at sea when the transfer of the officer took place and the new skipper had to navigate back to the harbor?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Anakuchin, relatively benign. I believe light west breeze, but benign flat seas.
So I only have one question, Mick, and that is, how did the two officers decide who got to bring the boat in?
Mr. Chair, quite honestly, one of the wonderful things about Harbor Patrol and the 10 officers is they all have unique individual, on top of their training and everything, they have unique individual skill sets, and it so happened that Officer Neufer was on duty that night. He is a fabulous boat operator, but quite frankly, I think any of our 10 officers could have done it, but Larry did an exceptionally good job.
Okay, thank you so much. Any further comments or questions? New business, Mary.
Lease amendment with Chuck's Waterfront Grill. Recommendation that Harbor Commission consider and recommend to City Council approval of a lease amendment with Rich Ones, Inc., doing business as Chuck's Waterfront Grill, 113 Harbor Way, in order to amend the reimbursement for improvements clause common to restaurant leases for tenant capital improvements.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the lease agreement between Chuck's Waterfront Grill and the City of Santa Barbara was executed in 1997. Chuck's leases 7,505 square feet of space on the first and second floor of the Waterfront Center building. The base rent's currently approximately an average of $17,000 a month for the base rent, or 10% of gross sales, whichever is greater. And the tenant is usually in, if not always in, percentage rent payments. The percentage rent actually escalates to 11% of gross sales after the tenant has achieved $3 million in sales in a given calendar year. And they actually did break that into the 11% category in 2008. Base rent, like most of our leases, virtually all of our leases, is subject to an annual cost of living increase based on the Consumer Price Index. The tenant also reimburses the city for its proportional share of common area maintenance expenses, what we refer to as CAM expenses. Currently, the CAM reimbursement from the Waterfront Grill to the department is $4,466 per month in addition to the base and percentage rent. The lease was originally a 5-year term with 7 5-year options for a total 40-year term, same as the neighboring Maritime Museum. And the tenant at this point has 30 years remaining on the lease. Now, for several years, Chuck's owners, Steve Hislop and Larry Stone, have expressed interest in having the building, the Waterfront Center building color scheme changed to something not so institutional as the white building currently, in their opinion, is. Additionally, their ground floor patio for the Waterfront Grill is not screened. It's exposed to the breeze and the elements, and does not have the glass windscreens common to other beachfront restaurants such as the neighboring Breakwater Restaurant, Shoreline Beach Cafe at Ledbetter, the new Boathouse at Arroyo Burro Beach, and Beachside Bar Cafe out in Goleta. It's very common to have a glass windscreen around your patio. The difficulty is the Waterfront Center building is designated as a historic landmark, and any changes to the exterior of the building are subject to the review and approval of the city's Historic Landmarks Committee, or HLC. So since 2007, Chuck's has been engaged in the HLC approval process to get approval to change the exterior color of the building, add a glass windscreen around the ground floor patio, add radiant or forced air heating to the patio area, and add a sail-like canvas awning to shelter the patio even further. Chuck's architect David Van Hoy presented the tenant improvement plan to the Harbor Commission on November 16th of 2006, which some of the commissioners will recall. Chuck's now has approved plans and permits in hand, and they're ready to proceed with the project as soon as possible. Chuck's has solicited proposals from several contractors, and they're estimating the cost of this project to them will be $300,000 approximately. And in addition, the department has budgeted $75,000 for repainting the building and repainting the metal window trims as well. But that will be recouped from the common area maintenance charges I mentioned earlier. The Chuck's owners believe they can increase lunch and dinner service on the ground floor patio significantly with these improvements, and their CPA submitted a sales and rent projection indicating that he expects sales to increase by 18% in the year following the completion of the project and 3% per year thereafter. In terms of background, I need to back up a little bit and talk about the reimbursement for tenant improvements that comes into play in this particular lease and is the reason for this amendment that we're discussing tonight. In December of '97, the Harbor Commission reviewed and approved what is referred to as a reimbursement for improvements lease provision, primarily in restaurant leases. The reimbursement for improvements provision allows eligible tenants to apply to offset their percentage rent for certain improvements such as infrastructure improvements that are approved in advance by the Waterfront Department. These are offset against the percentage rent only. The tenant is still responsible for paying its full base rent obligation. Some examples of tenants that have this in their lease are Brophy Brothers, Char West, Harbor Restaurant, Minnow Cafe, Shoreline Beach Cafe, Santa Barbara Shellfish Company, Sea Landing, and Santa Barbara Sailing Center. And the clause is intended to encourage tenants to invest in the infrastructure of their property, improve the property, which benefits the tenant and the city in terms of increased sales and increased percentage rents to the department. A good example of a similar project would be when Shoreline Beach Cafe a couple of years ago added a substantial awning over their exterior patio, and they added forced air heating to that patio. And they received rent credits to do this under the program, and their sales and percentage rents have improved following that project. Chuck's intends to use the reimbursement for improvements clause to make the patio improvements in the Waterfront Center building. However, the current formula of 10% of actual rent paid would only get them to about $27,000 or to $30,000 of this $300,000 project. So there began our lease discussions and negotiations. That was the primary issue. They wanted a one-time expansion, if you will, of that reimbursement credit up to $150,000 specifically for this patio project, should it go forward. As I mentioned, the tenant will continue to make base rent payments, which currently amount to $206,000 per year, and the $150,000 rent credit will be gradually offset against Chuck's monthly percentage rent obligations, so the department won't get the full hit. It'll be spread out over time. And after calendar year 2011, the reimbursement for improvements clause will revert to the original formula that's already in the lease of 10% of actual rent paid. Other than the one-time increase to the reimbursement for improvement clause, all of the business terms of the lease remain the same. A similar enhanced reimbursement for improvement clause was negotiated with the Harbor Restaurant when it expanded its patio and patio enclosure in 2002, so we do have a precedent for this. I'd like to add that the architect for the Chuck's project, Mr. David, did I say architect? The architect for the project, Mr. David Van Hoy, designed the glass windscreen and tenant improvements at the new boathouse at Hendry's Beach, the former Brown Pelican site, which, if you've seen it, is a very nice addition to that restaurant. Staff believes this is a good project and should pay for itself in time via increased sales and percentage rent, and we ask the Commission's support in recommending approval of the lease to City Council.
Are there any comments or questions for Scott? Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Scott, you say it's Chuck's Waterfront Grill, but I assume it's Endless Summer as well?
Yes, Commissioner Sloan, Endless Summer, it's the same owners. Endless Summer is on the second floor, and Chuck's Waterfront Grill is on the first floor. It's a similar model to the Harbor Restaurant, where you have longboards on the second floor and Harbor Restaurant on the first floor.
Yeah, I understand that. I just wanted to clarify it, just to make sure that they were both there. And then when we did the similar thing with the Harbor Restaurant when they extended their patio and the Shoreline Beach Cafe, did we see similar sales increases as the Chuck's CPA is projecting here?
Well, Commissioner Sloan, we've not seen that with the Harbor Restaurant. The Harbor Restaurant sales have been relatively flat the last couple of years. I think because of mostly from economic conditions, the higher end restaurants seem to be suffering more than the inexpensive restaurants for fairly obvious reasons. We did see a good increase with Shoreline Beach Cafe. They went up to our fifth largest revenue generating tenant after this improvement. I don't have the percentages tonight.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Are there any other questions or comments for Scott? All right. Well, I only have one comment that I would throw on here, Scott, and that is, since this now becomes our second time to do this, Harbor Restaurant being the first time we granted something out of the ordinary, are we, and anybody that wants to comment, I mean, this is just my notion, we've pretty much set ourselves up to almost have to grant this now because we've done it twice amongst our tenants. Is that a fairly safe assumption, or are we going to still hold the line that it's a case-by-case consideration?
Commissioner Kelly, we'll definitely have to evaluate these types of things on a case-by-case basis, and the financial analysis showing that it will benefit the department. It's a unique situation, as I mentioned before. The patio has no screening and no coverage, and the umbrellas and mushroom heaters just aren't cutting it. So we believe this will be a good improvement, and also we have a lot of confidence in architect David Van Hoy after seeing that boathouse project.
Okay. So it's a recommendation, and I think they're looking for a motion. Is there a motion on this recommendation?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and is there any further discussion? So, all those in favor of the recommendation as presented, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. So now we're off to the physical budget review.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission A receive a report on the development status of the fiscal year 2011 Waterfront Department operating and capital budget, and B, provide comments and direction on the various components of the draft budget proposal.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, this is our first run-through, basically, on our budget. We'd like to run through the overview and then take your comments and questions at the end. This is just the beginning of the process. We'll be back over definitely next month to fine-tune and take your comments and fine-tune the budget presentation. I'd like to start just by reiterating for the folks that might be watching at home or might not realize this. Unlike the general fund, the Waterfront Department does not receive any tax revenue. I know you're all well aware of this, but I like to start out these budget presentation this way. General fund receives transient occupancy tax, otherwise known as bed tax or hotel tax, utility users tax, vehicle license fees, sales taxes, and some property tax from the county. Waterfront just has 4 streams of income. We do not receive any taxes. It's from user fees such as parking and marina fees and lease rents from our property management program. In terms of an outline, last month we looked at some detail at the year-to-date revenue and expenditures for fiscal year 2010 as of December 31st. We'll also talk tonight about some of the FY 2011 budget challenges that we're expecting, challenges and issues. We'll show some tentative 2011 budget projections, potential fee adjustments and increases, review the capital projects, and talk about our 6-year cash flow model and how it relates to our reserve balances in the outer years. Just to recap on our current year revenue, again, this was covered in more detail last month. But our fiscal year revenue is doing a little bit better than it was at the same time period last year. Property management percentage rents are down and interest rates are down, but this is in financial management, but this is more than being made up for by our fee increases that we enacted in the parking services program and also in the marina management program. So while we're down $60,000 in the property management and financial management programs, we're up $436,000 in the parking services and marina management relative to last year, about a 6.4% increase or $375,000. So this year is shaping up to finish out at budget expectations. Some of the issues and challenges we'll be looking at with the 2011 budget is Waterfront Department will not be proposing any increases in permanent staffing. We haven't in some time. We have 46 full-time equivalents, or full-time employees as they're referred to. We do expect a continuation of the 5% unpaid furlough. That's 13 days unpaid leave for the department. We expect a minimum of that. Last year that did not include the police and fire departments nor Harbor Patrol bargaining units. I believe this year the city administrator is negotiating with those units as well to expand the furlough and get a better savings to the general fund from the furlough. We're also going to be seeing a new debt service payment starting off on August 1st, and that's our first payment on the Marina One loan. It'll be approximately $143,000 this year, but this is a phased project, and so as we dip into the Cal Boating loan, that debt service is going to go from $143,000 this fiscal year, next fiscal year actually, to upwards of $448,000 by the end of our 6-year cash flow model. So it starts off kind of small, but it creeps up on us. So we're going to need to keep an eye on that. Also, we expect there will be a continuation of the new programs that were brought to Waterfront on July 1st, 2009. That being the July 4th fireworks show, the beach restrooms at the foot of Stearns Wharf, the visitor center in Ledbetter Beach, and also the maintenance of the dolphin fountain, which we simply absorbed into our operations. And then the Waterfront Department is paying parks for the beach lifeguard program. We're not operating the program, but we're reimbursing parks for it. So, moving from 2010 to what we expect in 2011, this is just a breakdown of the salaries and benefits line item. Full-time salaries are expected to increase by about 2.5%, and that is mostly due to negotiated increases in the Harbor Patrol program. Hourly salaries are about level. The benefits line item, which incorporates a number of different things, workman's comp insurance, PERS, and health insurance is expected to increase by 4.2%. And again, as I mentioned, the furlough is expected to continue again this year, and it's being negotiated at the current time. So we expect an overall increase in the salaries and benefits line item of 3.4%, or $182,000. Okay, moving on to FY 2011 expected expenditures by program. The Waterfront Department is divided into 9 different programs. All of these are expense-generating programs. 4 of them are revenue-generating programs. As you can see, the first one is the administration program. It's by far our largest expenditure program at the department, and this is because the administration program is where the debt service comes from. It comes out of this program, all of our debt service. The overhead allocation, which is charges that the city charges to the Waterfront Department for various services rendered. I included some of that information detail in your packet, and I won't go over it here. We can talk about it after the report if the Commission is interested in digging into that. And the increase that we're seeing here of $186,000 is mostly due to the capital outlay transfer, funding capital monies into the capital fund for Carl to build his projects. And that's about a $200,000 increase this year over last year. And that's common. It fluctuates quite a bit. Property management, one of our smaller programs in terms of expense, but a $4.2 million program in terms of revenue generated, was expected to go up about $13,000 or 5% due to an increase in our advertising and marketing and promotion for our tenants. Financial management, our smallest program, that's our accounting department. Again, a very small expense, but they make it up generally in interest revenue. The decline in expense that you see there is the salaries and benefits and the furlough. Parking services, the same thing, primarily furlough savings there, 2.83% reduction. Harbor Patrol, this was one of the units that did get some pay increases. They will receive another pay increase in fiscal year 2011, and so that's the 6.17 increase that you see in the Harbor Patrol program. Marina management, again, a reduction in the both hourly salaries, which we were able to reduce, and also the furlough savings for the several folks that we have working in the marina management program. Harbor maintenance went up, mostly due to parking lot sweeping contract going up, and our janitorial contracts. Again, we had to add to harbor maintenance, we added the Ledbetter restrooms, which increased our janitorial contract slightly, and a number of janitorial supplies, and also the electrical and utilities associated with the restroom. Wharf maintenance is the same story. They picked up the Dolphin Fountain and the 2 restrooms, so that's janitorial expense and labor. And finally, the facilities and capital design program, that's a 1.13% savings due to the furlough program. So overall, for fiscal year 2010 compared to 2011, we're looking at a 2.7% expenditure increase. These are the same numbers, but they're expressed differently, broken out into salaries and benefits, supplies and services, ICS and allocated costs. And what that is inter-city services, good examples of which are information systems, motor pool, other city departments that provide waterfront services. Allocated costs includes the overhead allocation, and again, I put examples of those in the attachments in your packet. We can discuss them in greater detail later if there are any questions. The capital outlay transfer, you can see the $200,000 increase right there. Last year, it just so happened we needed to transfer $1 million to balance our capital program. This year, it's $1.2 million. The debt service, you can see that going up again. That's a result of the Marina One DBA loan, our first payment on that loan. Equipment and software is going down slightly. The special projects and promotions, that is the lifeguard program, the beach lifeguard program, and the 4th of July fireworks program. That's what the special projects and promotions is. And then our appropriated reserve is something that we don't often have to use. It's simply a contingency that we put in the budget every year, $100,000 to $150,000 a year for unexpected things that come up during the year, such as storm repairs that might come up or something like that. This year we've had to rebuild the sand berm twice because it got washed away during the storm. I don't know that we anticipate dipping into appropriated reserves for that, but it's there if we need it, and frequently we do not use it. Okay, so in terms of the capital projects, we had a presentation by Carl in November. The Commission received the 6-year capital program, but what's funding this year is just the capital projects scheduled to fund in 2011. And we have $2.5 million, which will be funded from surplus revenue from the operating fund, including the capital outlay transfer, our capital reserve fund, which is also our harbor preservation fund, and then we're getting some significant loans, as I mentioned, from the Department of Boating and Waterways, and we're working on a state grant as well from the Department of Boating and Waterways. So the capital projects look like this. Phase 2 of the Marina 1 project, which is the O&P dock replacement. As Carl mentioned, we're doing the headwalk this year. Next fiscal year, we'll be doing the O&P fingers. Marina renovation, this is dock boxes and redecking of the marinas. It's an ongoing program every year to maintain the marinas. Parking lot maintenance, this is slurry sealing. We do one of our lots each year to keep up on that. Stearns Wharf heavy timber replacement, this is piles, pile caps, stringers, and deck boards, and we do this every winter to keep up on the maintenance of the wharf. West Beach dredging, as Carl mentioned, we are hoping that some, if not all of that, will be funded by other agencies. I believe FEMA may be contributing some to that project, so we may have a savings there. And then minor projects, repairing the fish hoist and harbor restroom ADA compliance remodel, replacing a lift station at Stearns Wharf, seawall ADA handrail. Our handrails along much of the marinas don't have the pickets at the required distances, so we're going to incrementally replace those each year, and then the sidewalk repairs that we incrementally replace each year. Solar thermal upgrade on the hot water on one of the restrooms, and then there's your grant for the launch ramp concrete. That's for the design phase, and we will proceed with that launch ramp project if and only if we do receive this grant from the Department of Boating and Waterways. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We've also programmed $90,000 in to replace the decaying aluminum frame windows on the 125 Marine Center building. We've allocated $25,000 for the Marina 3 ADA project, which is widening a dock to make it a little more ADA user friendly. And then the Waterfront Center building renovation was the painting and work associated with our responsibility on the Waterfront Center project. So again, total capital projects, $2.5 million and change. And just here's a graphic of the Marina 1 replacement project. As I mentioned, the headwalk will be done this year, and that is the highlight is O&P docks. And then we will continue to work from east to west each year through the phases of this project and gradually replace each finger one at a time. In this case, 2 at a time. Some of the challenges, again, our revenue outlook for fiscal year 2011, we are not counting on release revenue going up in the immediate near future. As you can see, our percentage rents are down a bit, not a big surprise there. Interest income is also down. Parking services, we anticipate, we saw an increase this year due to the fee increases, but we don't have any proposed parking fee increases this year, so we expect parking services to flatten out. And marina management, we're anticipating to go up due to some of the slip fees we're going to talk to you about tonight and some of the new slip fee categories that we're going to talk to you tonight. And also, slip transfer fees seem to be rebounding, which is hopefully a good sign in the economy that people are purchasing boats and transferring slips again. Some of the potential fee increases under consideration for several years now. We've been increasing slip transfer fees by $25 a foot, except we've frozen that on the 20-foot slips. Also proposing or considering a 4% overall slip fee increase, as was the case last July. And something new that we're bringing forward to you tonight is establishing some new categories for slip fees in 60-foot and larger slips and also end ties. Currently, our maximum rate is tied to the 50-foot rate. which is currently $9.37 a foot. And all the 60-foot slips and the end ties that are larger than that are keyed in at the 50-foot rate. All of our other slip sizes, say 20-footers to 30-footers, 30-footers to 40-footers, and 40-footers to 50-footers, each increase about 8.5% as you go from category to 10-foot category to category. So extrapolating that out, if you take the 50-foot rate and you put an 8.5% increase on it, the new 60-foot rate under consideration would be $10.57 a foot. 70-foot end ties would be $11.47 a foot. 80s would be $12.44. 90s would be $13.50 per foot, and a 100-foot end tie would be $14.65 per foot. And this is based on the 4% slip fee increase on the 50-foot slip plus that 8.5% incremental increase every 10 feet. So this is a new idea under consideration that we wanted to bring to your attention tonight and talk about. If this is something that looks like the Commission is interested in pursuing, we will notify these slip and end tie permittees that will be affected, so they'll be well aware of it in advance of it taking place, and they'll have the opportunity to come to meetings and comment on this concept. So the revenue intended to be generated by these potential fee increases, we estimate that the slip transfer fee revenue would go up by $50,000. The 4% slip fee increase is equivalent to $147,000. And this new model for 60-foot and larger berths would be approximately $40,500. So these fee increases would be about $237,500 to the Waterfront Department's revenue next year. This slide is a breakout of the Waterfront Department revenue estimated for 2011 by program. Again, the property management program, we're expecting that to fall off by approximately $229,000 next year compared to this year. That's factoring in the project, the Chuck's project that we just mentioned. We won't be expecting any percentage rent from them that year while they absorb their improvement credits. Financial management, we're already seeing that we surpassed the 2010 budget of $125,000, so we expect to increase that budget amount. Parking services, I mentioned, we're planning to see those relatively flat. And marina management, with these new fee increases we just discussed, we expect to increase by about $429,000, or 8.6% increase. And also in there is the rebound in the slip transfer fees that we've seen. We budgeted a very conservative number in 2010 for slip transfer fees of $250,000. I believe halfway through the year we're closer to $330,000, so we've already surpassed that already. So we're factoring that into this. So again, about $250,000 in additional revenue we're expecting next year. Okay, moving on to our 6-year cash flow model. The assumptions that are factored into this model are a revenue growth of 2% per year in 2012 and thereafter. For instance, in our commercial leases, restaurant leases, and parking program. Slip transfer fees, we expect to continue with the 25-foot increase per year. Slip fees we're projecting out at 3% in 2012 and then going back down to the 2% thereafter, which is what we've been doing in later years. This also factors in the Maritime Museum lease buyout. We expect to see a balloon payment of $340,000 or so in year 2013. So the 6-year cash flow assumes the balloon payment, and then in year 2014 and thereafter, it assumes that they will no longer be paying their rent. They will only be paying their store rent and the common area maintenance costs for the building. And this was negotiated 2 years ago and approved by the council, this lease buyout concept. We also have listed $1.9 million in unfunded projects that we need to do, some ADA compliance elevators, replace Patrol Boat 3, etc. We've put them on the list, but we have not funded them because we can't make the reserve numbers pencil out. So this is a look at our 6-year cash flow spreadsheet. Hopefully it resembles somewhat what's in your packet, and I won't walk you through each and every line item, but this is the revenue. The top side of the first 6-year cash flow sheet. And this lists out the various revenue, the lease revenue, service charges, which is the slip fees and marina management revenue, and then our parking fees and our interest. So under this model, we're seeing our gross revenues going from $11,673,000 expected in 2010, current fiscal year, to $13,046,000 in 2016 in the out year of this cash flow model. So moving down to the bottom half of the spreadsheet for the operating expenditures section, this lists the salaries and benefits, furlough, supplies and services, debt service, and various other, several of our debt services. Indicates that our total operating expenditures will be $10.5 million, ranging to $12.5 million in year 2016. And again, that increase is largely due to the DBAW loan increasing from $143,000 to $422,000 in year 2016. The net operating gain, that is revenue less expenditures, is expected to be $1.1 million in 2010, ranging down to $516,000 in the out year of 2016. So wrapping up and taking a look at our reserve requirements, the Waterfront Department, like all city departments, is required to maintain an operating reserve, and that's the first two numbers here. One is referred to as the reserve for economic contingency, and that's 15% of the operating budget, less debt service. And the second one is reserved for the future year's budget, which is 10% of our operating budget, less debt service. So the operating reserves are required to be maintained at 25% of the operating budget. It's simply a factor of what your operating budget is with the debt service backed out, and then 25% of that taken. The third reserve is our reserve for capital, or our harbor preservation fund, and that varies up and down according to our excess revenue after expenses and also what degree of capital projects we're doing over the time. The Harbor Preservation Fund is required to be kept at a minimum of $2 million per the municipal code. If it gets up over $5 million, the interest can then generated in the reserve can then flow into the operating fund, and we can use that for expenses in the operating fund. So this is the second page of this 6-year cash flow spreadsheet. It shows our capital projects going out 6 years, but again, tonight we're really only concerned with the 2011 capital projects, which I went through individually. With this model, we're looking at maintaining a total reserve balance over the next 6 years of $5.1, almost $5.2 million to $4.5 million in 2016. That's the operating reserves plus the Harbor Preservation Fund. Operating reserve requirements will be maintained between $2.2 million and $2.7 million in this 6-year cash flow period. And the Harbor Preservation Fund will be maintained at $2.9 million. Unfortunately, in the last year of the model, in 2016, it drops suddenly below the $2 million level and drops to 1.7, almost $1.8 million. Generally, we don't like to present a budget based on that sort of number, but in this case, there are so many variables that we're going to work with this and see if we can fine-tune it by next month and maybe get that up closer to the $2 million. So just to summarize, we're expecting revenue in 2011 of $11,776,000, expenditures from the operating fund of $10.7 million, and capital projects funded in a variety of ways, including loans and grants and surplus revenue from operating, $2.555 million in capital projects, and the FY 2011 reserves will remain within policy minimums. Not so necessarily in 2016, but this is a one-year budget. And just to wrap up the budget review process, we met with the Harbor Commission Budget Committee on the 3rd of February. Tonight we're doing the initial review at the full commission. We meet with the city administrator and the finance department at the waterfront on March 1st. We'll get more information then. And we expect to bring forward a budget to the full commission on March 18th. The council usually holds work sessions and budget hearings in May and early June, and then typically they adopt the budget in mid to late June. So with that, I'd be happy to conclude the report and take any comments, answer any questions the commission might have.
Scott, thank you very much. It's a very complete presentation, and I have some questions, but I'll defer to my other commissioners and let them present their ideas or comments. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they want to? Okay, Commissioner Sloan.
Scott, what is the current slip transfer fee for the over 20 class?
I believe it's $250 per foot currently, going to $275 per foot July 1st if this is passed.
And then on the larger slip fee structure, how many slips are in the harbor that would be affected by that? If it was in here, I apologize. I must have skipped over it.
Glad I came prepared to answer that. We have 29 60-foot slips, 3 70-foot end ties, 5 80-foot end ties, 0 90-foot end ties, and 1 100-foot end tie. It's actually a 104-foot end tie, but it would fall under the 100-foot category.
So you're talking about less than 40 slips. That would
38 people affected.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner Kramer.
Mr. Chair, before Commissioner Kramer, if she'd indulge me, just a comment along the lines of the proposal on the adjustment, if you will, for the slips above 60 feet. Somebody asked me, why have we never had a rate for slips beyond the 50-foot, or why does the 50-foot rate apply to the 60-foot and there is no differentiation going forward? And I've been the director for 14 years now, and I didn't have an answer. I think it's primarily because the harbor never really had many 60-foot slips until we expanded it. And when we expanded in 98, I don't think we really took into consideration creating this variation or scale that would then apply not only to the 60s, but then go to the end ties, which fell into that category. So I appreciate my staff. I think Mick, in evaluating marina fees this year, brought this to our attention, and I really looked at it as a sense of fairness. There's been a differentiation all the way up from 20 foots through the 50s, and why shouldn't there be for the value of the larger slip? They have larger cost, certainly to us, from the electrical standpoint or the maintenance standpoint. So I think it's a fairness issue. I don't think it's an attempt to just find an area that we can get additional revenue. It's to balance what I think has been an inequity for quite a few years. So I wanted to offer that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bradley. And then I had overlooked Commissioner Friedman, so if...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question. I had the same questions regarding the slips. Thank you. Understand those now. The other question I had is regarding the Department of Boating and Waterways grant. It says here we're applying for $800,000 in grants, and given the current state budget fiasco, are we planning that we're going to have those, or is there a contingency that the state might pull out? How secure are they? Or would they come in, say they give us some not up to $800,000? What are the plans then?
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Friedman, the Department of Boating and Waterways has two different programs, a loan program and a grant program, and they're funded at different levels every year. They used to fund pretty large launch ramp-related projects with this grant program on the order of millions of dollars. They have less revenue now, so now they're looking for these $300,000 and $400,000 projects. So we're somewhat encouraged that we have a project that they can fund with this reduction in revenue that they have for the grant program. It's still a bit of a wild card. When we got our $5.5 million loan last year, it was an incredible amount of work to secure that and then wait until the governor adopted a budget and actually approved the loan in and of itself. So it's, we're going to try. The money's out there. We really don't know what's going to happen. The governor's budget, proposed budget this year, does have money for boating and waterways. Last year, his proposed budget dissolved the department. So it's better. They did reduce the amount of money for it, but that's a good start. At least there is a department and there is a budget and some funds in it, and we have to compete for those, and we'll put together the best package we can and hope for the best.
And should we not get a grant or from them, would we just defer that project till a later time when we do have the grant, or is that something that we have budgeted and we'd move forward using reserves or something like that?
We would not pursue it at this time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kramer.
And thank you, Scott, for that really detailed report. It's really interesting. One thing that stood out to me on the overhead allocation was the 41% of the city attorney fees being allocated to the waterfront department. I was surprised by that. Why is there so much?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, that does not represent the entire city attorney office's budget, that 41%. I can look into this a little bit more, but we have one attorney assigned to us, an assistant city attorney. She divides her time between waterfront and airport, and then her boss, Steve Wiley, the head city attorney, I imagine a portion of his salary is in there. There are also, we have litigators. We just wrapped up a lawsuit recently. We have another one pending. So I believe they take those salaries that are dedicated to airport and waterfront, and then they portion them out that way. But it certainly isn't 42% of the whole city attorney department budget.
Okay, well, that's the way it read to me, and I was quite surprised. Hoped it wasn't.
Are there any further questions or comments? I'll throw my little 2 cents in. Have we factored in, when I look at it, I can't determine in the visitors' fees, if we're going to be utilizing visitors' fees for the displacement of vessels, should we throw that revenue line pretty much, there won't be any visitors because we'll be using it. I'm going to throw a number of things out, and just so that we make sure that we have that in the next cycle of this particular budget. Another one would be, I know we're pushing quite a big debt ball now in the waterfront department. Have we prepared a schedule so that we can look at when we can refinance any of this debt in the near future while interest rates are low? Do we have an opportunity to refi and potentially lock in a lower long-term interest rate? And then the other one is, at what schedule do we actually begin to retire some of the old notes? I don't know what that is, so that I know that shows up as a debt line, but just as a long-term lookout, what does that look like? Because it's about $1.5 million that we're pushing now, if I read the number right. And that would be good to know. And then one last point has to do with the larger slips. The ones that are slips actually and contained, I think our approach is very good. And I could get behind that. I don't see anything wrong with that. But the ones that are actually in ties and don't have a beam restriction, we might want to consider a different approach than just an 8.5% increase. And I know that really only affects 9 slips, if I'm not incorrect, because they don't have a beam restriction on them. And we might want to consider something other than the 8.5% increase there, because they can now put, the mini Queen Mary in there, and so possibly we should collect revenue for that. So those would be my comments on that.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I didn't get all the questions or comments that you had, but I have one that I want to address, and hopefully staff is thinking about the other ones that you raised. What I would suggest, and I think it's a very appropriate comment, if not question, and we do this next month, is allow Scott to take some time to prepare for you, both in written form and then in presentation form next month, a series or a summary of the various different loans that we have, and what the debt service is, what the term is, what we're currently paying, and when they might be retired. Because we do have several debt service sources. One is an old loan to the general fund. for the renovation of the Stearns Wharf back in the early 80s. The main source of debt is the certificates of participation, which were done as part of the 83 rebuilding after the El Nino storms. And then we have, of course, our new debt with DBA. And then we also have another loan that we borrowed from the city to rebuild the Chandlery project when we had our administrative offices. And they're varied and they're different. The one that we have the most probability of refinancing is the certificates of participation. However, they do have a prohibition for refinancing. I was going to say a call, but that's not it. It's an actual prohibition of refinancing for a specified period of term. And if my memory serves me correct, I think that's up in 2012. And in 2012, we would be in a position to defease the existing bonds and go out and refinance and put a new debt structure in place. But it would be difficult to answer those all here tonight, and it'd be a bunch of numbers, and I don't think we have all of what we need to give you. So good item for next month. Give you a better picture of the entire debt. In fact, it'll give us all a better picture.
Okay, excellent. I wasn't really expecting to get an answer, but just something that it didn't occur to me when we were in the committee, but it did occur to me in the full presentation that we should look at this.
And if appropriate, we can go over with the committee members before our next meeting so that you have a chance to delve into it a little deeper.
Okay, if it looks like it's that then just call a committee meeting with all the foresight and all that.
And I'm sorry, there were other questions. If the staff was sure.
If you have the answers, you can throw them out. If you don't, then we can just pick them up the next time.
So, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow me, since next time is going to be burdensome already, let me take a stab at least the vessel beam NTI issue. You're correct. You know, it appears on the surface that because NTIs have open water to their outboard side, that there is no beam restriction and they should be paying, you know, commensurately. A couple things to consider. Number one, that's not a never-ending story. That's not an open door. Owing to the configuration of the harbor, different end types do have considerable restrictions on them, either via the Federal Navigation Channel, navigability issues, turning basins, and all kinds of restrictions therein. Also, in terms of consistency, doesn't mean it can't happen in the future, because there are a couple of harbors that do it. We don't charge slip fees based on square footage of water. We charge our slip fees based on a linear calculation. And finally, something for the Commission to consider. I'm not advancing this as a pro or con, but because this is a new fee for the NTIs, and because it is proportional, though I think in the real world considerable for folks to deal with, I think it might not be unwise to consider that as part of the calculus, how we want to deal with the NTIs as well.
Okay, it was just a comment, something to consider. So, any further comments or questions?
Okay. We'll address the other ones. The visitor fees we have factored in, but we'll go through that in some detail.
Okay. So it was, I think that was a good agenda item, and I think the Commission gave its comments, unless somebody has other comments they want to give. The last one are the selection of the committee members. Yeah, Mary, you want to read who's in the various committees? I think we all have that on the back. If you want, go ahead and read it in. This is how it currently stands.
Budget Committee, Commissioners Kelly and Kramer. Chartering BAP Committee, Commissioners Spicer and Owen. Dredging, Kelly and Anakushin. Marina One Reconstruction, Anakushin and Kramer. And the RFP Selection Committee is Commissioners Spicer and Kramer.
So there are two commissioners who have no committee assignments, and one commissioner who has a bunch, and who would like to be where? I don't really have a plan for doing this unless I was going to let people say where they wanted to be, and then we'd see how it fell. Unless, John, you have a...
Well, and we do have one where Commissioner Owen is no longer
Correct.
here. So,
Yeah.
If anything, we should look for a replacement for at least the one.
Yeah, so why don't we take the Chartering and the BAP Commission first, and Commissioner Sloan or Friedman, would either of you want to jump into that one?
I'll take it.
Okay, so Commissioner Sloan would replace Commissioner Owen. One down. And then I am on dredging and will gladly surrender my seat if Commissioner Friedman wanted that slot. But don't let me put you on that committee.
Maybe for the new commissioners, just a little background. We, from time to time, create committees so that we can allow your input into matters and get more down into the weeds than we have the opportunity here at commission meetings. Relative to the dredging committee, this committee really hasn't met in several years, at least, maybe longer. The committee really was put in place when things like maybe funding isn't going to come our way, and what would we do? And then at one time the city was considering buying a dredge and operating it. So that was really some meaty input and discussions that we had. Good example is if for some reason we don't get the funding that we talked about earlier in the meeting, we would probably convene this committee, talk about our various options, and look at ways that we might be able to fill the gap. That would be a good example, but we don't meet on a regular basis. The same is true with the request for proposal selection committee. If we have a new tenant that's interested in moving into a business location and we've sent out an RFP, then we would get the committee together. They would help us in that selection process. Marina One, of course, has been far more active and meeting regularly. Scott mentioned BAP maybe once every several years. And the budget committee is our only real standing committee that we use on an annual basis. So that hopefully that gives the commissioners a better feeling of what they might be signing up for or agreeing to participate in.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the dredging committee.
Because it seems to me that the dredging committee may actually get called into action here if things go wrong. So I'll step off that, and then Commissioner Friedman and Commissioner Anakuchin would stay on that. Anybody else see anything else they are interested in?
Yeah, I'd like to stay on the budget. It's the first time I've been on it, and
Okay.
I'd also like to stay on the Marina One. It hasn't met since I've been on it, so I would like to remain. I don't care about the RFP selection committee. I mean, I don't want to be greedy and have 3 committees.
So if Commissioner Kramer retires from the RFP selection committee, would anybody else like to step forth and say, sure, I'll do that one? I'm only looking left and right. No, well,
I have a question.
okay.
Is there only 2 commissioners allowed per committee, or can we open it up to more? And the second question is, is this a good list right now, John? You kind of went through it, but is there something that we should be creating one or dropping off or something like that? Have you given any thought to that?
I'm fairly comfortable that the current list is a good one, and we should maintain the current committees. Staff, in fact, we were talking before we came up here today. We've got the possibility of a new committee that we might be forming or asking for your input, dealing with some ongoing parking problems that we've had in the main harbor parking lot. I'm not prepared this evening to say that we're ready for that, but it is something staff is working on, and if we do, we'll come back and ask you to volunteer if you're interested. Your first question is one I hadn't thought about, but you're absolutely right with the expansion of the commission. We could have more than 2. Prior, when we had 5, 3 would constitute a majority, and therefore we could not have 3 members. But now that we've expanded beyond that, I think we could. I wouldn't suggest that until we get the 7th member appointed, so that we don't have 3 and 3 or some situation like that, because currently we only have 6 members, I believe.
That brings up the question. A quorum for us now is 6. I mean, it's 4, correct?
Correct.
So 3 doesn't quite tip the scale yet.
Nope.
Okay. So does that take care of your questions?
And we will bring this list back as we typically do in July, when we look at not only the committees but possible vice chair and chairmanship roles.
So, does anybody want Commissioner Kramer's RFP selection slot? Or do we leave it the way it is? I mean, don't be shy. She's offered it up. Okay. The Commissioner Sloan says he'll go for it. So then that would leave us with the Budget Committee, Kelly and Kramer. Chartering BAP would be Spicer and Sloan. Dredging would be Friedman and Anakuchin. Marina One Reconstruction would be Anakuchin and Kramer. And the RFP Selection Committee would be Spicer and Sloan. So let's go ahead and take a thank you, Mary. Let's go ahead and, is there a motion to accept this as the committee assignments?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay. And any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. And I think that takes us up to Commission Staff Communications.
Mr. Chair, I really don't have anything else. I would like to echo Carl's point about the increased activity over the next several weeks. It's not often that we have scows of some 180, 90 feet and dredge activities with 2 dredging projects occurring virtually at the same time, and trucking of sand off of West Beach. So bear with us. We'll do the best we can to minimize the impact to the boaters and to our users. But they are both very important projects, not only for us in our sand management, but also for Goleta to get a little boost with about 50,000 cubic yards.
I did have one thing that I forgot. This would be a good time to bring it out for the Commission to find out if they have an interest in it. Since we discussed this in the committee, and I forgot to mention it when we were doing the budget proposal, the salaries and benefits represents almost 50% of our budget. And in the committee, I asked John the question, how do we factor in the benefits and the retirements, all of that, in that number? And John's response, correct me if I get this wrong, John, was that that's done in the finance department and it comes to us as a kind of a prepackaged number. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? Something like that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if the question, it's a little bit different than I think the issue that we discussed, although it may have been part of it, is do the benefit package and cost, which is included in our line item for salary and benefits, is that something that this department, including my own staff and administration capabilities, or the Commission have oversight into, or determine what level? The answer is no. The package for both salary and benefits are determined as part of collective bargaining, but it does incorporate the cost in the line items that you see for salaries and benefits. And then I think you had a question relative to unfunded retirement liabilities, and I attempted to answer that question, which is relatively complex, but the good news is there's really no unfunded liability that would be impacting the department specific in the future, but for the ongoing benefit costs. A good example being a long-term city employee, the retirement benefit that I will receive upon retirement has been paid for over the 29 years that I've worked for the city. it will not come as an added cost once I leave. It's amortized into the ongoing rate that's charged per individuals. Of course, it will be continued to pay by the individual who replaces me because he will pay into the same public employee retirement system. So there's not, if you will, an unfunded liability as there are with what do we call the county, is that's a self-funded program. We're part of a much larger public employees retirement system. So hopefully that answers your question. And I know you had a discussion relative to this with Scott earlier today. What I think would be a good idea for the committee, and I think we should probably meet before the next monthly Harbor Commission meeting, is to get you some more breakdown on what the benefit costs are, what the pension costs are, or salary costs, so that you have a clearer answer, because we get kind of it as a lumped figure as what you see up on the breakdown that Scott provided to you.
So go ahead, Commissioner Owen. I thought you were like leaning out there. I think it would be beneficial, at least at the committee level, and then potentially having that come to the whole commission. So if it's going to potentially come up to the committee, then we'll just let it work that way, and then bring it to the commission. And that was the idea that I was noodling with, because it's a very large item in our budget, and we don't want a surprise pop up on us. That was all I had. And unless somebody has some other comment or question.
I have a question about the upcoming changes within West Beach and the disturbances there. And as you know, I'm sure that many of the more pelicans have returned in the last week or so. So there's really a large number of birds. And will the bait barge be moved, or will that remain in place? And I'm sure that all sorts of attention will be paid to not disturb as much as possible.
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Kramer, it's going to be pretty disruptive there, and we'll be doing surveys for sensitive species. That's a requirement before we begin work. The bait barge will be moved, but probably just for a couple days when they dredge in that area. We've already discussed that with the contractor and let him know that we want to move that for as short a duration as possible. Not just for the birds, of course, but for the folks wanting to get bait and go out and fish. West Beach, the area that's going to be impacted is going to be somewhat consolidated to the west part of West Beach. The rest of West Beach is going to be open for birds and the public and everything else. So we try and minimize the impact all the time, but it's going to be a pretty disruptive project. I don't want to mislead anybody. It's going to be a lot of activity for 3 weeks, and then it's over, limited to 3 weeks.
Will there be a lot of disturbance on the Sandspit as well? Because, of course, the West Beach on the east end of it is also, it's kind of heavily human populated, which is a problem for the birds.
Yeah, the Sandspit won't have any direct impact to it, other than when they dredge around that area, sometimes the configuration changes a bit. They don't do anything directly on top of it. As they dredge at the toe of it, sometimes some of it sloughs off, so it changes a bit and reduces the amount of it a little bit at the low tide. But there won't be any activity on it itself to just disrupt the birds. It typically doesn't.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Unless there's any further comment or question on the staff commission communications, I think does anybody want to adjourn? Okay, there's a movement. Is there a second? Second. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned.